Welcome to the show, everybody. Christian Ojackson here with special guest Mitch Harper, BYU insider for KSL Sports. Thanks for being here with me, Mitch.
Happy to be on, Christian. Basketball's around the corner, and seeing the days get shorter, it just means one thing: basketball is almost here, and can't wait to dive into this BYU team with you.
I remember you coming on here last year and telling me about Kevin Young and Yegor Demon and all these new pieces, and just also his ability to keep guys like Richie Saunders, and a lot of the things that you said came to light. And man, was this a fun team to watch! What a run they ripped off at the end of Big 12 play. But they win, like, was it 8 in a row to end that? And then the NCAA tournament, Alabama doesn't miss a three in that Sweet 16 game, but two great wins over VCU and Wisconsin. So entering year two under Kevin Young, you bring in AJ Deansa, you bring in Rob Wright, and some really other interesting pieces in the portal. And this is one of the most talented rosters in the country. So tell me just how exciting it is to be around this program right now, and what your expectations are for what Kevin Young's able to do here in year two.
Most anticipated season in BYU basketball history, no question. And I remember Jimmer's senior year back in 2010, 2011. Remember that was Jimmer, BYU versus Kawhi Leonard and San Diego State in the Mountain West. BYU was a preseason top 25 team, but that pales in comparison to what this team can do, because for the first time ever, BYU basketball believes that going into any matchup, regardless of personnel resources, that BYU is on equal footing or maybe better than the teams that they're going to face in college basketball. It's a loaded roster. It's a talented team that has a lot of intangibles, and Kevin Young leads the way. And, retaining him was a big thing for this BYU program. BYU got a new athletic director in Brian Santiago, who has an extensive basketball background, strong ties to Utah Jazz owner Ryan Smith. And Brian Santiago, on his first day as the AD, he told us in the media retaining Kevin Young was a top priority. In the moment, you're thinking, this is in May, context there. And you're thinking, well, and I followed up. I said, are you concerned you're going to lose him? Because at the time, the Phoenix Suns job was open. And he said, well, we all know the connections that KY has to the Suns. And so we just want to make sure to retain him. And BYU, of course, locked him in with a new extension, and he's the guy for the foreseeable future with BYU basketball. But Kevin Young has delivered and then some for BYU basketball, to where this is a completely new world that BYU is living in, where they're viewed as a conversation piece in the national landscape going into a season. This has never been a thing for BYU basketball. There's a lot of excitement.
I want to start with AJ Deansa. I'm not sure if Peterson may be closed ahead of him, but this is the guy in this class for years now, and he's a confident kid. He's a big time athlete, 6'9", kind of wing, could play him up or down. Kind of in pen as a top 3 pick in the NBA draft. Tell me what you expect of him in here in his 1 year at BYU, and also just how does he fit alongside a group of some guys who are 24, and he comes in here as a young gun who's just an incredible talent.
What a huge get for Kevin Young and BYU, and AJ and his father Ace, they really believed in Kevin Young, and they trusted him. That trust was huge in this process. And watching AJ before he even got to BYU, I had the chance to go down and watch him in Hurricane, Utah, at Utah Prep, and you see it in person, and it's just different. It's hard to watch it on video or highlights, but you see that level of talent in person. He's an impressive player, and I think what's been the biggest surprise to me about AJ since he joined BYU is how willing of a passer he is. Sometimes in those Utah Prep games, watching him in person, I thought, I just want to see him take it over. But I think he really enjoys getting his teammates involved. And with a BYU roster that has a lot of shooting, and guys like Richie Saunders, who, was a first team all Big 12 player, that is what a luxury to have a talent like him and someone who's willing to pass the ball. But I think you bring up a good point about how he meshes in a program where maybe there's some older guys, including Richie Saunders. AJ's got to be the leader. Richie Saunders and AJ have to lead this thing. And I think just bringing this team together in the locker room, maybe the off the court dynamic, that's going to be critical because last year's team that reached the Sweet 16, that was a big talking point of what was maybe a big reason for their success when they faced adversity in early January in the Big 12. They came together as a group and almost got better through that adversity. When this team hits adversity, I'm sure at some point it will happen. How does this group respond to that? And AJ and Richie have to lead the way. But I think AJ's been, just a great fit. I mean, he is embraced BYU and then some. I mean, he goes about doing community service projects off the court. He had a Boys and Girls Club shoe donation with his partnership with Nike. It's not just simply like a transaction, it seems like, for AJ. He really wants to become a face and be BYU basketball and become a legend at BYU. And that's something that's available to him. And if he can get BYU to a Final Four, their first ever in program history, hang the jersey, because he's the type of player that BYU just never experienced. And he came to BYU because he believed that Kevin Young will get him even more ready for the NBA when that day comes, when he hears his name called in that, top 2 or 3, as you said. So it's been a great fit thus far, and I think his skills are going to work quite nicely with Kevin Young's scheme.
You mentioned Richie Saunders, first team All Big 12 last year, 17-5 on crazy efficiency, 52% from the field, 43% from deep, averaged 22 a game in those 3 NCAA tournament games. Man, is he a good player. We'll get to Rob Wright here in a second, but with Rob Wright and AJ putting the pressure on the rim and their athleticism, for Richie to kind of be able to just be this dynamite off-ball threat who is just so good. What do you expect from Richie this year? And then also defensively, not his strong suit as much as his offense. Is there maybe a step for him to potentially take there?
I think that offensively, he's the best three-point shooter on this team by far. And I think he left BYU last year, he could have maybe been a second-round NBA draft pick. And I'm curious to see if he can, take that another step forward on both ends to, maybe get in the back half of the first round potentially, because I think that's one of the interesting things about this year's team is with AJ, with Rob Wright, Richie's going to get even more eyeballs. There was a lot of eyeballs on last year's team with Yegor, and I just think that put him on NBA radars, but I think that grows even more with AJ's star power on this team. But I think Richie, though, he brings what was so impressive last year about him was the workload that he had offensively, emerging as BYU's number one guy, because that wasn't expected going into last season. He emerged as that. It didn't sacrifice maybe the intensity, the effort that he brings on the defensive end. I do think some of the, a couple of years ago, he was better, I think, on the defensive end, where he was more of a role player with Mark Pope. This year, I still expect Richie to take another step forward in that defensive game, because there maybe not going to be as much asked on him on this offense. Last year there was so much placed on his shoulders where plays ran through Richie. I mean, I think for Kevin Young and this staff, they don't have to dial much up. They don't have to do X's and O's and out scheme everyone, because you've got the personnel and talent to just outplay anyone, most teams that you're going to face this season. But I do think Richie Saunders is a talented player, and honestly, he could be maybe an All-American type candidate this year. I just think he is a really good player for BYU and the Big 12, and in college basketball, he can fill it up. And defensively, I think he brings just great intensity too. He has no worries about trying to take on the biggest opponent's offensive threat on any given night. He almost embraces that challenge, and maybe with a little bit lighter offensive workload where everything has to go through him as it did last year, maybe that can allow for that more so this season for BYU. But really excited for Rich, and I expect more leaps forward in his game this season heading into his senior year.
BYU able to get Rob Wright to come over from Baylor, 11.5 points, 4 assists per game, not great efficiency. It definitely dropped down the stretch. But when BYU played Baylor in Provo last year, great game in overtime, and Rob Wright was fantastic. He had 22 and 6. And I'm not sure if it was at that point where Kevin Young's like, I want that guy on my team next year, but I'm really high on him. I feel like everyone's kind of circling him as, whether he was at Baylor, BYU, wherever he went, as a guy who could take a huge step forward in his sophomore year. So tell me what you've been hearing about Rob Wright and how you see him fitting in here.
I think he's going to be an awesome fit. And look, I don't want to try to sound like this team doesn't have any sort of weaknesses. I mean, I still got all come together, but
We'll get there.
man, I think Rob Wright though, just his ability to finish at the rim. I talked with him just as practice started, fall practices a couple weeks back before that first day, and just his ability to finish at the rim. He kind of chalks that up to his toughness, his upbringing out on the East Coast, growing up as a Delaware kid, playing basketball. He had to be tough, and he invites that opportunity to get into the paint and finish. And I think that's what makes him so special. And you brought up that game in Provo. He did an excellent job at that, and he was so good in that game. I just think that, and he documented too a little bit of a deeper connection with AJ DeBonsa and their connection together, that they've had, various instances where they've crossed paths in their basketball journeys in the prep scene and whatnot. So they got a good working relationship. So, when he arrived in the spring, they kind of hit the ground running, and BYU got a head start on practices. Rob Wright was a little bit absent on the practice when they began back in May. He was dealing with a little bit of a thumb injury that was kind of a carryover from his freshman season at Baylor, but now he's cleared, ready to go. But BYU's been hard at work since May because they had this roster pretty much locked in for a while, and Rob Wright's going to be huge for this BYU team. And I think when we talk about DeBonsa and Saunders and Rob Wright, to me, it leads to where Kevin Young's not going to have as deep of a bench this year. Rotation last year, there'd be games where they go 11 deep.
Mhm.
Can't imagine that Young's going to go that deep this year, because you just can't picture scenarios where you don't have DeBonsa on the court, you don't have Saunders or Rob Wright. These are special players. I think they're all guys that maybe could be first round NBA draft picks. I think they've got that potential. And so these guys got to be on the court a lot. And I think they can carry the workload for BYU to win a lot of ball games this season. But Wright's going to be a good fit too. And I'm curious to see how he continues to evolve with his 3-point shooting and that efficiency because of the options around him now. But I just think that ability to finish at the rim. BYU hasn't had a guard since Jimmer Fredette that really could be a finisher. And Jimmer was always a great shooter from distance. Everyone talks about Jimmer range, but he was good at finishing too. Rob Wright's the best guard since then, and this is a big time addition for BYU, and that's why when you look at this roster and the resources invested into it, it's just unprecedented territory for BYU to have this type of talent. And now it's the task is in front of Kevin Young to maximize these guys to where you don't feel like they underachieved this season.
Anchoring this defense, Kebakeda, who was awesome last year, 7 points, 8 boards a game, over a block, one of the best offensive rebounders in the country, just so strong, explosive. Only 21 minutes, so would like to see that scale up hopefully, but tell me what you expect out of Kebakeda coming back here.
I think I'm curious to see honestly where he improves offensively. It's pretty limited, for Keita. He's going to be a vacuum on the glass. He's going to get you pretty much on any given night, maybe 10 rebounds, 12 rebounds even. He's so explosive. His athletic ability with his volleyball background. He's such a good athlete. You wonder what the pro prospects would be for him if he was 6'10", 6'11". He's a little bit undersized in terms of sheer height, but I think Keita, it was interesting back in Newark at Sweet 16 when BYU lost to Alabama. There was one guy that made it really clear he's running it back and he wants to be a leader of this team, was Keita. I remember that locker room where he's just like, I can't wait to really get back at it on Monday. And I thought that was noteworthy because, I think in this climate of college basketball, every player kind of leaves their future open at the end of a season, whereas Keita's like, I'm coming back. No question about it. I want to be here. I want to do it right in my senior year and get this thing to an even higher level the following season. I just thought that was impressive by Keita. And he dealt with a little bit of some off-season shoulder a little bit, so he's limited in the summer practices, but good to go now. And I think that he's going to be defensively, he is special. But I am curious to see in what aspects does he evolve on that offensive end. He's got such a good working relationship with Chris Burgess, an assistant coach at BYU. He worked with them when Burgess was at Utah and Keita was there at Utah, so they've been together for a long time. Burgess works with the post players, and and Kada, I would expect should improve a little bit. But the nice thing is that he's got a BYU's got a five in Zavon Staten, a true freshman who could come in and give him some quality minutes and give Kada a breather or two for some extended minutes, because Staten could be uh, a real shot blocker. That he's 7 feet tall, and that's the type of height BYU didn't have last year. So Staten comes in and could be a nice piece off the bench for BYU.
A guy that I'm really excited on, who I dove into recently, is Kennard Davis coming from Southern Illinois. Call me crazy, but in my limited exposure to him, he's another guy that I think could be an NBA player. 16 points a game last year, 5 boards, 3 assists, 38% from deep on pretty high volume, 5 attempts, and man, is he a great defender. I saw him chasing around a lot of good players. They played Florida, and he did a good job on Walter Clayton. Tell me what you think of Kennard Davis, and I feel like he's a kind of a perfect scheme fit and exactly what this team needs.
I'm with you, and I think he could be, a two-way guy potentially. They call him Moo, Moo, Moo Davis. That's his nickname on the team, and high expectations for him. I would expect he's going to be a night one starter, for opening night starter for BYU when they take on Villanova on November 3rd. But I think that defensively, he is where his strengths are going to be highlighted for this team, because I think offensively we can go through all these players, and offense is there's no shortage of offensive options on this roster. It's going to come down to the defense. And there were many games last season where Alabama, I mean, that was a historic night where maybe just you chalk it up. That was a career night for Bama. They couldn't miss anything. But there were other games in the Big 12 where BYU couldn't get stops, and they'd go back and forth, and it was high scoring games. And defensively were some of the opportunities for growth. And I think Davis makes them a bit of a tougher team on that end of the floor. And I just think that ability alone makes him a great fit, because he does have that ability, though, to be the top guy in a given night on the offensive end too. And I think that's the nice luxury for him. And he was someone that was kind of an underrated addition out of the portal. I think even for Cougar fans, where they just see Southern Illinois and just think, okay, like what's really there to expect about him? But when you do dive in to some of those highlights of his time in a good league in the Missouri Valley, he was a really good player, one of the better guys in that league. So I expect good things for Davis. I expect him to be a starting lineup player opening night, and I think defensively is where his attributes are going to be the strength of this for his addition under this team.
2 other returnees who played in reserve roles last year: Dawson Baker, who 8 points in 17 minutes a game. I know he struggled with injuries throughout his career. He was a good player at UC Irvine as well, but another guy who can stretch the floor, doesn't need the ball to impact the game. And then Boscovich gave you around 10 minutes a night as a reserve big. Didn't play every game, but that's another big body. So I'm thinking Boscovich and Zavon Staten, if I said his name right, are kind of that depth at the 5, and then Baker gives you another guard wing to throw in here. So that's like around 8 guys that I just mentioned. But tell me about those 3 guys that I just mentioned. How you think they can fit in and be plus role players here?
You kind of touched on it with Dawson Baker. He's just got to stay healthy. He's had the history with the foot injury that even dates back to his days when he joined BYU and Mark Pope was the head coach. And if he can stay healthy, he can be a real factor. I mean, Kevin Young last year even highlighted Dawson Baker's ability to just be a guy that can get a bucket, even in clutch minutes. When Kevin Young was asked early in his first season as the head coach by media members, like, who's your go-to guy when the game's on the line? And, one of the names he brought up was Baker, that he had that trust in him. But injuries have been an issue for Dawson during his time at BYU. So if he can stay healthy, Kevin Young believes in him, and it feels like he can be a guy that can give an offensive spark off the bench. And Boscovich, a little bit of an incomplete. He was a guy that would fire it up. He would take some quick shots. Sometimes ill-advised, but you love that ability from him. Defensively, I think there's some areas where he's got to continue to grow on that front. But I think Boscovich, it seems like no one out here locally that cover BYU been talking much about him. But I think he's someone that could be much improved this season as well for BYU. And but I think that this team, they've got a lot of options. And what's interesting is that then you can get into the Dominic Diomondes who came in from Washington, who would be probably in the past for BYU could have been a starter, one of the top players on the team, and you wonder, is there a role for him on this team? It's a really intriguing roster, and how this rotation is going to come to be for Kevin Young is really intriguing. I'm kind of curious to see how it all comes together. But some of those retention pieces were nice for BYU because they've got a good blend of high level prospects, new faces that level up the talent, but you still have retention of guys that understand the program. It's not a complete overhaul, 13, 14 new faces. There's still that retention, which I think is valuable in this day and age in college basketball.
Tyler Murs from Idaho and Nate Pickens from UC Riverside. Not really familiar with them. Are they purely depth, or do you think either of them can be a real factor here?
Yeah, I think Tyler Moross from Idaho. I think he was another guy that BYU faced in non-conference play last year, and same with Pickens at UC Riverside. So interesting, the portal additions outside of Moo Davis, a lot of guys that Kevin Young saw firsthand going up against BYU. But Tyler Moross could be, like a Trevin Nell last year, a real sharpshooter. And I think when you have guys like Deansa who are willing to pass the basketball, you got to have some knockdown 3-point shooters because he will find you. And same with Rob Wright. So I think Moross could have a role on this team. And I think he's a little more athletic than Trevin Nell, too. So Moross would be someone I think you watch for. And I think Pickens from UC Riverside, he could be maybe that backup point guard spot to Rob Wright potentially. And look, backup point guard could even be AJ Deansa potentially too. Like BYU could go a lot of different ways. Deansa could play any one of the spots on the floor, really. I mean, but Pickens, if he does have a role, that's what I would say would probably be the spot if that's how it ends up playing out. But Pickens was another. He was kind of one of the later additions for BYU in piecing together their roster for this season. But I think maybe he could be a depth piece. But I look at Moross out of those two, he could have a bigger impact because of his sharp shooting ability from three.
Any X factors stand out to you for the success of this team? Defense is the easy one, as they were 9th offensively in Kemp last year, 82nd defensively. But bringing in Davis and Deansa just has me kind of bullish on you being able to take that step. So, and even a guy like Diomonde, if he factors in here, I've heard some good things about what he can do there. So, I guess what are the keys to that defense? Cracking a top 30 or 40, which could pair with that elite offense to get the team to be top 10 level good, or is there anything else that kind of stands out as an X factor?
Well, I would say also another name to maybe watch personnel wise would be Hadim Mbop, number 7. He's a redshirt freshman. He redshirted last year. He's one to watch. I think that could be added to the front court that could be a player. And we look at months from now and say he's in the mix. He's in that rotation, helping out defensively, because I do think that's the area where I want to see growth from BYU. He's 6'9", really good size. BYU added him. It's like an NBA academy in the summer of 2024. And then he was a late enrollee and enrolled in the winter semester, and really just took his time to kind of observe and redshirt last season. And he's underrated. So I'd keep an eye out for him as maybe someone to crack into this rotation potentially too for BYU. But I think defensively, defending the three better. And I think the physicality, I think they're better equipped physically for the Big 12. It was such a talking point, whether it was fair or not, last year that, Yegor Demin and Joman, now he goes by Joman with the Brooklyn Nets. But the physicality of the Big 12 was a little bit of an adjustment. Even the freshman Cannon Catchings, who's now at Georgia, they struggled with that physicality early on, particularly games against Houston, where BYU just got steamrolled. I mean, they were not competitive early on in Big 12 play. And I think this group is better equipped for that. And I think AJ Deansa, it invites the physicality. He is such a great competitor too. And I think that's something that I'm curious to see how this bodes in the Big 12. There was at the NBA All-Star Weekend, Deansa had a conversation with Kevin Durant, who was someone he looks up to. And Durant, of course, played in the Big 12 when he was at Texas, and he was the Big 12 Player of the Year and National Player of the Year. And the advice Durant gave to Deansa going into the league is you got to be the best player in the league. That's kind of the standard. in the Big 12 for heralded freshmen, Trey Youngs, Blake Griffins of the world, Cade Cunningham's, to be the best if you truly are going to be, that number one type pick. And so I would expect that Deansa, once he's got the motivation on both ends of the floor to kind of embody that. But I think he'll be kind of a tone setter on defense for BYU and help out with that 3-point defense that at times teams just went off on BYU. I feel pretty good about where BYU is on the glass because I think guys like Kada, Staten, Adim and Bop, Deansa, as I noted, they're pretty athletic around the rim to limit teams to one shot. And I think personnel wise, they match up quite well. Where I just think they can throw out a lot of different lineups and looks to match up against teams. And I think what's going to be great for BYU this year too is we're going to get a sense of what BYU is going into Big 12 play. They loaded up this non-conference schedule because they, one, feel like they've got a team that can contend nationally for something big, but two, they wanted to have a little bit wider margin for error to get a higher seed. Last year, they finished with a 6 seed after turning it on in Big 12 play, but they started slow and they had a great non-conference record. But they didn't play anyone of note. This year, you've got games like Villanova in Las Vegas, UConn in Boston. It's going to be a bit of a homecoming for Deansa, but it's going to feel like a road game because Boston is basically the backyard for UConn. So that's going to be quite the game. Maybe two top, 5 top 10 teams in action. Clemson and Madison Square Garden, Miami and Georgetown. I mean, this is a really good schedule. Wisconsin. So we're going to know a lot more about BYU heading into Big 12 play. Whereas last year it was 2 months to really like, how good is this team? And then they get into the Big 12 and we forgot about them people nationally forgot about them after they got hammered by Houston. This year, we're going to learn a lot right away. And I think that, how quickly this team comes together on that defensive end and the physicality they play with will be something that I'll be watching for early on, because if they can win these games, you could be talking about a BYU team that maybe could be 1 seed line good because of the strength of this schedule potentially in the Big 12 and the non-conference opportunities, but it's got to come together pretty quick. And this program feels like they got the personnel to do it.
Really exciting times over at BYU, one of my teams I'm most excited to be watching this year. So thank you for coming on, Mitch, and breaking it down with me.
You bet, Christian. Always happy to do it, man.